Every season, footballers are bought and sold, agents negotiate fees behind closed doors, and transfer fees are splashed across headlines. And somewhere in amongst it all, and in the middle of it all, a number gets attached to it, a market value. That number matters a lot. It shapes transfer negotiations, it represents a player's form and potential, and fundamentally it shows where a player is going in his career. The question is, where does that number come from? Welcome to Market Values. My name is Stefan Bienkowski and I'm the host of this new Transfermarkt podcast, a platform that has been tracking market values for footballers around the world for the best part of 2 decades. This show is about one thing and one thing only, helping you, the viewer or listener, understand a player's market value and why doing that gives you a sharper, better understanding of the beautiful game. Each week on this show, I'll be joined by my colleagues from Transfermarkt's international content team, a group of experts who cover the sport across the globe. And we'll be taking a look at the biggest stories in the game and what that means for the very players at the heart of each and every story. Whatever or wherever the biggest stories in football may be that week, we'll speak to the people closest to it. New episodes will be available every single Wednesday, and you can watch along on YouTube or you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you enjoy your podcast shows. And of course, you can also watch along on Transfermarkt along with our market value coverage, which is the inspiration behind this show. We're only just getting started with this journey, but we'd like you to join us and be a part of it from day one. On the very first episode of Market Values, we are kicking things off with a bang and have something very special in store for you. March is a very busy period here at Transfermarkt. It's when we run through the interim market value updates across all of our major leagues across the world. And this week, we're looking at two of the biggest leagues that you possibly could talk about, the Premier League and the Turkish Super League. There have been some really big changes in market values in the latest Premier League market value update this month. One player in particular at Anfield has emerged as a true Liverpool star in the most unlikeliest of positions, and elsewhere, two England internationals have really struggled to live up to the reputation they set for themselves with their impressive performances in the English top flight last season. And in Turkey, a nation defined by its passionate football fans, we take a look at the chaos and drama that tends to follow every Transfermarkt market value update of the Turkish top flight. We'll be taking a closer look at both of the nation's biggest clubs, and in particular, a look at one of Europe's most in-demand strikers not that long ago, and why perhaps his form might be faltering despite his impressive price tag. Let's get into it. So I'm here now with Ben Littlemore, my colleague on the English team, but also more importantly, our Premier League market value coordinator. And Ben, you've been a very busy man over the last couple of weeks because you have been overseeing the market value update of the Premier League. It's the biggest league. It's the most valuable league in the world. It's obviously the one that most people around the world take the most interest in. It blows up on social media every time we post it. We have players, agents, clubs always getting in touch. It's a very kind of busy time for us, especially in the English team. But the Premier League market value update is now out. We have some big talking points from it, but I think maybe the best way to start this, Ben, is by taking a look at the biggest winners from the market value update. And when we throw it up on the screen there, we can see that, well, hopefully we could see that the kind of maybe running theme here is that we're seeing a lot of kind of young players, perhaps even teenagers, coming through, and those players were the ones that really stood out the most in this market value update, weren't they?
Yeah, I think it sort of signifies we're seeing top clubs go younger and younger in the transfer market now, looking to sort of gamble on the next big star, because particularly with the Premier League profit and sustainability rules, clubs have seen it as an opportunity to make money as well as make stars. We've seen Chelsea bring in a whole host of young talents and hope that one of them pops off and they can then sell them or hopefully do well for the team as well. But if we look at the top 10 biggest winners from the update, 4 of them are actually teenagers. And I think we should probably start by talking about Mateus Maié, who actually plays for bottom-placed Wolves, but has really burst onto the scene this season. Now, his timing was a little bit unfortunate for us because he came into the Wolves team and started having an impact almost simultaneously with when the last update went out. So at the time, he had a market value of just 250,000 and then became a regular in the Premier League as a teenager, scoring goals, getting assists, and obviously that value looked way too low. So he got the biggest increase on the update, going up by 19.75 million to a new value of 20 million. to reflect where he's at and what he's achieved since then. There's already been a lot of talk about top clubs, Manchester United in particular, potentially making a move for him in the summer, and Wolves, who probably will go down barring the biggest miracle in Premier League history. It would be surprising if some Premier League team didn't take a gamble on him in the summer. And if it continues, we have another update in June where he may even go up further. So he was the biggest beneficiary. But then even if we go down to second place, we go to Kroupi Jr. at Bournemouth, another teenager who has taken to the Premier League like a duck to water this season following his transfer from Lorient. He's got 8 Premier League goals. And again, already been linked with a lot of top clubs. We know top clubs are scrapping to get strikers in. It was a big talking point of the summer transfer window. And Junior Kroupi has proved he's got great ball striking ability, which a lot of top clubs are looking for. And with his age, still being 19, he's one that gets a big increase of 18 million to take his new value to 40 million. Also in the top 10 when it comes to teenagers is Everton youngster Haaland Armstrong, who's been the starter for Everton recently, keeping the likes of Tyler Dibbling and Tyreek George out of the team. He moves up to 12 million with a 10.8 million increase. And also another Bournemouth youngster, Ryan, the Brazilian that arrived in the January transfer window from Bournemouth. If add-ons are met by that deal, which they probably will be in the future, it probably rise to around 40 million the fee. And again, he started in the Premier League very strongly. So he's another young talent to look out for that a lot of top clubs, maybe not this summer, but the summer after, will perhaps be looking at.
Yeah, Ryan in particular is a player that I know our Brazilian team are very excited about. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you wrote a profile on them, or maybe it was our colleague Ewan who did so. And yeah, our Brazilian team are very, very excited about him. Before we move on, I just think it's kind of interesting, kind of take a note of this, Ben. This kind of almost like the trend that we've seen in the transfer market amongst Premier League clubs this season, because it felt like a couple of years ago we saw a huge shift towards clubs signing ready-made Premier League stars. It's when we saw a lot of clubs, and you could maybe be a bit more pessimistic and say, well, clubs were selling to each other to try and boost up their incomes and increase the margins for FFP purposes. But it feels very much like they've kind of made a change to, or a lot of clubs have made a shift towards signing young players and almost signing a certain profile of player, age, position, even nationality to an extent, because they know that on paper they'll hold value, they'll hold market value. And as we've seen with guys like Mane, Kroupi, Ryan, when they kind of not only join a Premier League club, but then actually pop off, or whatever you want to use the expression, that's when we see their market value soar very quickly, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think, like you say, I think clubs there's not been many cases in the last 10 years of a Premier League club spending a lot of money on a player at age 28 or over, and it's sort of working out. Often, like you say, their values start to plummet at that point and there's no resale value. It's also interesting what you were saying there about the Premier League proven thing, because this is kind of combining the two. So when you have these youngsters that are getting any minutes in the Premier League, they're like Mateus Maié has scored 2 goals and 2 assists in the Premier League. That is looked upon very favourably because the league is so difficult. So when a young player is coming in and proving they can have an impact in the league, that shoots their value up a lot more than if they were playing abroad, probably, because it is the hardest league in the world right now and the highest standard. But yeah, definitely there's a huge shift in clubs. As I mentioned before as well, I think the financial rules are also playing a part in that, because there was a time where Manchester City or Chelsea could go out and spend whatever they want and it didn't really matter if it didn't work out, because Roman Abramovich wasn't particularly bothered as long as his team won and one of them worked out. Whereas nowadays, clubs are having to be a bit smarter. And I think we've seen that as a theme as well. Premier League clubs have always had the most money for the last 2 decades, but now they're actually starting to spend their money a bit smarter as well.
Yeah, well, one player who certainly isn't a teenager anymore and is actually a senior, experienced and really reliable player for Liverpool is, of course, Dominik Szoboszlai, who perhaps the kind of marquee or biggest talking point from this market value update. He saw a €50 million increase to €100 million. He joins the €100 million club for the first time as a player. I just checked there, and when he left RB Leipzig, his market value was €50 million. So he has more or less doubled his market value since moving to the Premier League. Ben, we won't be surprising too many Liverpool fans by saying here that we think he's had a good season, but for anyone who maybe hasn't been keeping an eye on Liverpool, why don't you try and explain why we felt it was important that he got a big market value upgrade in this market value update?
Yeah, I think the case of Dominik Szoboszlai is so interesting because in the summer I had a lot of people telling me that Szoboszlai is not going to play this season. Florian Wirtz came in and Szoboszlai was that sort of most advanced attacking midfielder in that 3 for Liverpool last season. Wirtz came in, people weren't sure whether Wirtz was going to play out wider in that role, how it would affect Szoboszlai, and a lot of people expected him to maybe be someone that was coming on from the bench and making an impact. But in a dreadful title defence for Liverpool, he's been by far their most consistent player this season. And obviously he's had to fill in a lot at right back, but even then he plays an inverted role and he has a huge impact on games. And his ball striking ability and technique is there for all to see. And I think that's gone a long way to filling the huge void left by Trent Alexander-Arnold, because in terms of his ability to cross, to have shots from the edge of the box, create chances, Szoboszlai has really stepped up in that regard this season. I mean, he scored 4 free kicks, which is unheard of in a season these days. And he's certainly been the most consistent player for Liverpool. Still only 25 years of age as well, so time is on his side. And we felt, it had to be reflective now that he had to move ahead of Alexis McAllister and Ryan Gravenberch, and getting closer to those top echelons. I think he's the 5th most valuable centre midfielder in world football right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned those two players, Gravenberch and Alexis McAllister, because last season we saw their market values rise very quickly because they were central to that title race. And we've maybe seen both of them maybe drop off a little bit this season. Now, I don't know if it's whether a case of them actually dropping off or just in comparison to Szoboszlai, they've kind of been nudged out of the limelight. But, you mentioned how Szoboszlai has kind of stepped in for Trent Alexander-Arnold, but at times I've seen people suggesting that, okay, going forward, he's going to have to play in midfield. So what does that mean for Alexis McAllister? What does that mean for Gravenberch? And I guess that's a kind of interesting kind of wrinkle to the situation at Liverpool right now. And, maybe it's a kind of silver lining to that cloud that's hanging over the club right now, that even though maybe some players in that team aren't performing so well and maybe some have seen their market value drop this season, at least they've got Szoboszlai in there, who almost like a one-man team. He's stepping in for Trent Alexander one week. Sometimes a suggestion he might step in for Alexis McAllister long-term in the middle of that park. But I suppose that's good news for Liverpool in a sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think Liverpool's midfield trio last season was so balanced, and that was a key reason behind them winning the Premier League. And obviously with a player as talented as Florian Wirtz coming in, they've all had to adapt. And comparing the 3 of those players, it's always a difficult one when it comes to market value, because Gravenberch is younger and obviously had a fantastic season last season and saw his value shoot up. McAllister hit 100 million last season. He's now down to 80. I think a lot of the thinking at the time of him hitting 100, because he was probably the performer in the midfield last season, although all 3 of them played well. And he also had that international experience. He was a World Cup winner. He was playing regularly for Argentina. So that's why he was just ahead. But we've seen that balance shift this season. And McAllister's even been out of the team at points. He hasn't been a guaranteed starter, although form recently has started to pick up again. So that's why he's dropped. And now Szoboszlai, we've seen the pendulum swing. And he's the one that Liverpool fans are looking for to get them out of trouble most weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one person I want to maybe touch on before we move on to the next section is, of course, Semenyo, player who moved to Manchester City in January. He got a €10 million upgrade in this market value update. He's now up to €75 million. Why don't you touch on him before we wrap up the kind of biggest winners and move on to maybe some depressing news for some players?
Yeah, definitely. So these intermediate updates that we usually have around March, as well as taking into account form over that busy sort of Christmas period and early in the new year, is designed to also reflect the transfer market, the winter transfer window, and players that have moved for certain fees and to adjust for that. And Semenyo is a perfect example of that. He was moved on for €72 million to Manchester City. He was valued at just 65 million before. He's obviously gone to Manchester City and had an instant impact. And should they wrestle the league from Arsenal and win the title again, he would probably be the difference in that with his goals. So now that he's performing at Manchester City, he's one of those examples where we reflect that fee, and he's gone up because of that. Mark Guehi has also gone up. The fee was lower with Guehi, but that was because there was 6 months left on his contract, and we sort of have a rule of thumb that then we'll take that for around the third of what the fee would have actually been. So he also moves up to 65 million. So a 10 million increase for him as well. But that's an important thing as well in these updates, as well as the form, taking into account what we've seen in the January window and what we've learned from that winter transfer period.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not as clear cut as just lining up the market values with transfer fees by any means. Okay, well, with every rise, there must come a fall as well, Ben. And we've also got a number of kind of high profile players who have lost market value. When we throw that kind of top 10 up on the screen now and let people kind of look through it, they'll see a number of interesting players, a number of star players, a number of the most viable players in the league. But I think the ones we kind of want to touch on here are Saka and Palmer, 2 England internationals, 2 players play the same sort of position. Saka obviously pushing for a league title. Palmer obviously tried to get Chelsea back into that top 4. But as we can see, they've both lost €10 million. Saka now worth €120 million and Palmer worth €110 million. Why don't you talk us through the reason behind both of those players losing market value and how you think their season has gone so far?
Yeah, they were both incredibly difficult decisions, and we had plenty of debate within our own Transfermarkt team, within our market value forums, and within the wider community at Transfermarkt, because they're undoubtedly incredibly high quality players that on their day would probably get into most teams, if not any in the world. However, there has been a drop in form from both of them, and that needed to be taken into account. I mean, Saka has 4 non-penalty Premier League goals this season, and Palmer has just 3. So when you're at that very high end of 120 million, 130 million, you've got to be performing numbers as well as just having overall good performances. And Saka, if we start with Saka, he plays well. He's Arsenal's most threatening attacker most games, and he's still creating some chances. But his numbers have dropped right off. And one thing that I've particularly noticed this season is his finishing. He used to be quite reliable in front of goal, and now he's taking too many touches, and a lot of his shots are wild and shooting well over the bar. So to hold 130 million, which is such a high value, we just felt we needed to be reflective of that. But it was only a 10 million drop because I don't think anybody would be surprised if Saka ended the season well and started finding the back of the net and getting assists again. With Palmer, it's a very similar story. The only difference with I suppose both of them, to be fair, have had injury issues this season, which have also halted them, and they've been struggled to get a run of games together. But Palmer's been in and out of the team probably more due to that at Chelsea. And just when he shows signs that you think he's going to get back to his game, he drops right off again. And in a lot of the big games, he hasn't stood up like he once did. I mean, in that 23-24 season, every time Palmer got the ball, something happened. And you don't quite feel that anymore with him. We've had other young stars like Esteval come in. He's also had the unsettled 2 managers have gone in that time as well, which hasn't been easy for him. But at Saka at 120 million and Palmer at 110 million, they still remain 2 of the most valuable players in the world. But we just needed to reflect the dip in form this season for both of them.
Yeah, I guess both are maybe similar stages of their career in terms of that kind of heaped responsibility is now on their shoulders. Saka, obviously, a really key player for Arsenal in that push for the league title. But also Palmer, he's now, he's not an old man by any means, but he's now considered one of the kind of established stars at Chelsea. And with so much turnover at that club, maybe a lot of Chelsea fans, and I guess England fans will be looking to him to say, right, well, they can understand if someone like, as you say, Esteval's maybe kind of learning his trade this season, but Palmer has kind of been there and done it. So there's now, I guess you could say, increased expectations on both these players. Maybe we demand a little bit more, and maybe that played something into it as well, perhaps.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Like you say, I don't think any of them can be considered youngsters anymore. 23 and 24, these are the players that their teams are looking to. I mean, Saka's captained Arsenal on a number of occasions this season. These are players that you expect a lot from, and because of those expectations, and they haven't been quite met, that is a reason behind the downgrade for them both.
Obviously, the biggest one that we also have to talk about, and it's a little bit of a misfortune because he's obviously had his issues this season, but of course, Alexander Isak. His market value has dropped by 20 million euros. He's dropped down to 100 million euros. Ben, it's a season to forget for Isak from start to, I guess, more or less finished now that we probably, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure if he will be back before the end of the season, might just make it back. But his market value's dropped by 20 million euros. What an incredible story for all the wrong reasons for this guy. He breaks the Premier League transfer record. Everyone thought, right, this is the guy who's going to help Liverpool push on. And it's just been bad news after bad news for him, hasn't it, this season?
Absolutely. I think if once that move was finally completed on deadline day, I think if you'd explained to Isak, or Isak could imagine the worst possible season he could have had, he couldn't have even imagined how bad it's been. I mean, obviously he missed out the preseason. He sort of had to push for the move and really struggled with form in the early parts of the season. At that time, we actually had to go up with his value to reflect the transfer fee. At the time, he was at 100 million and the transfer fee was 145. So we had to push up to 120. And then the form was really poor. He wasn't even getting in the team. Ekatike was having a much bigger impact in starting games. And then he finally, gets a goal against Tottenham and you're thinking, is this the start of something? And as he puts it in, the tackle comes in and he breaks his leg. Like, it's so unfortunate. But he is likely to miss the most of the season. He might be back in May or late April for the last few games, but it's unlikely he's going to be up to speed to really have an impact this season at all. And then we also have to take age into account. By the time he's now back playing next season, he's going to be 27 years old. So things haven't worked out at all. And he gets a minus 20 million downgrade, which is partly the form, but also because of that huge injury. And, as sad as it sounds, a lot of players don't come back the same after an injury that serious. So it will have to be assessed when he comes back. And we're all hoping he can get back to the player he once was, but there's no guarantee of that. And, there's a good chance he may even go down further again because age is starting to come into it. So you have to feel for Isak. Well, I doubt Newcastle fans do, to be honest, but everyone else probably has to feel for Isak. And unfortunately, we had to reflect that in this update. And he's still 100 million at the moment, so not bad value.
Yeah. Still plenty of time to bounce back, of course. We obviously can't talk about misfortune or poor form in general without talking about Tottenham. Their total squads in this market value lost 8.4%, which is a pretty huge number. I've got more or less the numbers in front of me. I'm just running through them now, and I'm not sure any other club saw a bigger drop in overall market value. As we just showed on the screen there, 3 of the top 10 biggest decreases in the market value this season, in this market value update were Tottenham players, Christian Romero, Xavi Simons, and of course Kulusevski, all losing 10 million euros. Ben, we're not breaking any news here. We're not exactly telling anything that people don't know, but we have to touch on Spurs and the fact that they've obviously been terrible, but also, their players have also had to lose market value as a result of that.
For sure. And I'd say probably overall Tottenham players were the hardest to determine the new values in this update. Overall, they did go down the most in value, 74 million they lost. The next closest was actually Arsenal with 37 million, so over double any other team in terms of squad value drop. However, they still do remain the 5th most valuable squad in the league, over 800 million. But obviously, we have the genuine prospect that relegation could be an option. They're probably unlikely to go down with Forest and West Ham below them, but they're in a relegation battle. However, they still have players that are talented and there probably is a market for. So finding that balance was difficult. But there were so many players that are just way too high valued to be in a relegation battle. That can't happen when you have those sort of values. 3 of the players to suffer the most were Christian Romero, who, although I think most Tottenham fans will tell you when he plays is one of their best players. However, his mentality has become an issue. He's speaking out against the club constantly. He's become a real liability in terms of red cards. And a lot of Tottenham fans also feel he's checked out a little bit. I think he probably will move on in the summer. And I think he probably will be for around 50 million euros, which is his new value. Xavi Simons, again, is one. He's showing some signs of the talent he's got, without doubt, in recent weeks, but he's really struggled with the physicality of the Premier League and being able to grab the games by the scruff of the neck as they need in that position. He's really not helped with the players around him, in fairness. Tottenham don't really have a midfielder who can play through the lines and find him on the half turn, running at the back four, which definitely goes against him. And Kulusevski is another one where the injury, we keep getting an expected return date and it keeps getting put back and put back and put back. And it's getting to the point where he hasn't played football in over a year now. So at 45 million, we had to reflect that, and he goes down to 35 million. I mean, if he comes back and starts playing well, we know he's a player that can go up again, but we had to be reflective of that. And there was a lot of other updates with slightly smaller downgrades that didn't quite make the top 10, but made the top 20 for Tottenham, and reflective of the position they're in. We obviously also have another update in June, the start of June, at the end of the season. So if Tottenham do go down, we'll know that by then. And if that is the case, then there'll probably be a lot more downgrades.
Yeah, and of course, one of the kind of most unique aspects of market values, at least in British football, is of course amending those squads that do go from Premier League to Championship. And of course, you're in charge of the Championship market values as well. And every season we talk about taking a hatchet really to those market values from the squads that get relegated. Now, I'm not saying that's what we will have to do with Tottenham in 6 months' time, but it's a potential. But even over above that, Ben, even if they do manage to avoid relegation, it's really tricky because we've got a squad here that's technically full of stars, but stars who will all, not all, but wholesale, a lot of them will either be sold because the club don't want them anymore or because the players want to move on. So I guess it's about trying to, and I suppose, as you said, we still have one more market value update before then to kind of maybe tweak these market values, but we are trying to kind of look ahead to that summer and think, right, well, someone wanted to sign Christian Romero this summer, someone wants to sign Xavi Simons, etc. How much did these guys actually demand in the open market based on what we've seen from them this season?
Yeah, it's a difficult balance because we often try to separate the player from the team because obviously every player has a different situation, and Tottenham also have quite a young squad because that's been something they've been investing in, so that obviously gets the values up as well. But like you say, if a team gets relegated, that not only affects the position of a selling club, which then usually leads to players going for less money, but it also, the buying club look at these players and think, okay, well, you got relegated, so there's serious question marks about at least your mentality, if not your ability as well. So that does obviously lead to huge downgrades as well. But yeah, as I say, it's a difficult one with Tottenham because they have got young players who there is a market for, but if they continue this form, clubs are going to want them for a cheaper fee, and Tottenham are probably going to be forced to sell them for a cheaper fee.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's finish up on a more positive note. Let's take a look at the top 10 most valuable players in the league after that market value update. Ben, I don't know if you want to just quickly run through the top 10, and then we can also kind of pick up on some interesting things. But, we've got Haaland at the top, and then after that, there's some familiar faces, I suppose.
Yeah, I think nobody would be surprised that Haaland's at the top of the tree, and by some distance too. So he sits at 200 million market value. We then have an 80 million drop to Bukayo Saka and Declan Rice, who are both valued at 120 million. Now that is a huge gap, the biggest gap there's ever been in Premier League history between the most valuable player and the second most valuable player. And I found it was very indicative of the fact that a lot of the stars in the Premier League, particularly the attacking stars who are usually worth more, have failed to really deliver consistently this season. We've seen Foden drop from 150 to 80 in the last 2 years because he's dropped right off. Saka, we've seen drop from 150 to 120. Palmer was a little bit higher at 130. He's gone down to 110 now. Vert's the same. He's struggled to adapt to the Premier League this season. So because the Premier League is becoming so difficult and so compact and every game so difficult, a lot of these attacking stars are struggling to flourish, minus Haaland. So that's why we found ourselves with that huge gap between him and the chasing pack. I think what was also quite interesting when you look at the top 10 most valuable players, and sort of as we put this together, we don't really know exactly how they're going to be because, as I say, we judge each player individually. But 5 of the top 10 are Liverpool players, which is quite surprising considering the season they've had, but maybe less surprising when you consider the money they spent in the summer. They broke the Premier League transfer record twice, so that's why Verts and Isak are in there. They obviously spent a lot of money on Ekitike, who's been good this season, and then Szoboszlai has been in great form, and Gravenberch has just about held on to the top 10 positions. He's 10th at 90 million. So I found that was an interesting thing when you sort of put them together as well. The other players that we didn't mention there was just Palmer, who I briefly touched on, and Caicedo at 110 million for Chelsea.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that briefly, about the gap thing, which you mentioned, because it's not really the case in other leagues either, is it? Where I guess, you think about La Liga maybe, and you'll have like Real Madrid and Barcelona obviously dominate that, but it's more of a kind of tethered system, isn't it? Or tiers where you have, your Lamine Lamals, but then you have like a Pedri, you have your Gabis, etc. And then same situation at Real Madrid. But it's interesting that in the Premier League, and maybe this speaks more to the kind of grueling nature of the Premier League, perhaps, rather than other leagues like La Liga or the Bundesliga or something like that, where stars are maybe a little more protected. Perhaps it's not as physical football, but it certainly seems as though, as you mentioned there, the league's kind of struggling, or maybe the other clubs are struggling to have individual star players that can match Haaland's kind of just general star quality, really.
Definitely. When you look at the goal scoring numbers, obviously Haaland's out in front, and then you have Igor Thiago at Brentford, the striker, and then Semenyo, who's just been signed, and they're significantly lower down. And the other top attacking stars are nowhere near it when it comes to goals and assists. I think that is a lot because the Premier League has become so difficult, and defensive teams are so well set up. It's so difficult to get space. You can never really get 2-on-1s anymore. Everything is 1-on-1, and teams are then moving towards set pieces to get an advantage, the bigger teams, which obviously doesn't benefit the numbers of the likes of Bukayo Saka, because Arsenal are scoring a lot of their goals from set pieces because they're facing low blocks and they're struggling to break teams down. And that's not just an isolated incident for Arsenal. That's happening across the board. And Haaland's the only one that can really defy that and even he is quite a physical player, which helps him get a lot of his goals. So I think, when we compare that to La Liga or the Bundesliga, the leagues that are slightly more open, that we're seeing more open play goals, and it's easier to score for these top teams considering the dominance they have as well. I think that's why that we're seeing this gap in the Premier League now compared to other divisions.
Yeah, it's such an interesting kind of way to look at it. And of course, there'll be people who are watching this who are fans of La Liga, Bundesliga, etc., and they'll be interested to know the differences between the leagues. So we definitely do take everything into account. Before we let you go, Ben, let's briefly touch on a really interesting new aspect to the website, at least for English speakers here in the UK or .com or even in the US. And of course, we now have the market value board, or the market value forum if you want. If you go to our homepage and you hit on community, you can then go through to market value analysis, and that will take you through to a forum of wonders and limitless potential where we have more or less every single player in the league You can jump into their page. You can make your comments about how much you think their market value should go up or down. You can obviously vote on that. You can also vote on their market values on their player profiles as well. But Ben, this is a relatively new thing for the English side of Transfermarkt. Obviously, our German colleagues and our German users have had it for quite some time, but it's a welcome kind of dimension to your job, isn't it? Or our jobs in general, kind of keeping tracks of market values, because obviously the user input's obviously very important as well at Transfermarkt.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, maybe particularly in the UK, aren't aware how big a part of our market values it is, sort of user driven. And yeah, like you say, if you head to our market value forum, you'll see every day debates being opened about what a player's market value should be. Now, as you say, that's something that's been huge in Germany and maybe some of the other countries in Europe for quite a while, and it's something that's been really growing in the UK in terms of participation in the last sort of year or so, really. And it's also becoming better and better debate on there, because as it's, when people first went on there, they maybe weren't aware exactly how things work, and they were sort of chucking away, throw away comments and stuff. But now we have really good, interesting debates and lots of good points being brought up, which are then eventually taken to our in-house market value meetings and taken on board and affecting players' market values. So anybody out there listening, if you want to have a say, if you think, an Arsenal player is too high, if you think a Man City player is too low, if you think anything about a certain player, head over to the website, go to community, go to market value analysis, and then you can search a player and have your comment on anyone, and that will open a debate, and that will be listened to by us and taken forward. We also have a handy tool if you go on any player's profile now, where you can just vote on whether their market value should stay the same, go up or go down. And that's something that we also take into account, and we look at the numbers when we're on there. Some of them are a little bit dubious when it comes to players signing for Galatasaray, but we take it into account nonetheless. So yeah, that's a great way for everyone to have their say, and that is a huge part of our market values and how we get there to that final decision.
Yeah, I think our Turkish team would have plenty to say about the Galatasaray and Fenerbahce voting. But as far as we can tell, it's been pretty civil on the Premier League pages, and anyone who's out of line, Ben is there to, smack them with the banhammer quite easily. So we like to keep a very kind of civil corner of the internet. Ben, I'm going to let you go. I'm sure we'll have you back on very soon, not just for the next Premier League update, but there's plenty of news in the Premier League in the meantime as well. But for now, thank you very much, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Another major market value update at Transfermarkt this week was, of course, the Turkish Super League. And joining us this week on the episode to talk about this is the international content lead and, of course, the area manager for Turkey, which is Lara Karacan. Lara, before we get into which players have gone up and down in value, we discussed this before we start recording. We have to talk about the phenomenon that is the Turkish market value updates. For people outside of Germany, or people certainly outside of Turkey, might not know this, but at Transfermarkt, every time we do even an interim market value update for Turkey, all hell breaks loose. So could you maybe give some sort of idea or insight into what happens for the Turkish Transfermarkt team, but also Transfermarkt in general whenever we do change the market values for the Turkish Super League?
So I think it's a privilege to have this kind of audience, this kind of fans. We are known for our passion, for our football love. It's not only football, it's our religion. So as you know, I'm also half Turkish, so I know that feeling very well, how to feel about football. So when I join Transfermarkt, I know that we are crazy, that our audience is crazy, but I didn't know that we are so crazy, Stefan. And I didn't know that is so huge. And I'm now here 5 years, and with every year there's a new surprise, a new passion, a new pressure also, of course. But yeah, I think the market value phase is special. Transfer period is also special because new signings, new passion about new players, and everyone goes crazy. They love new players. They love new transfers, as you know, in the airport when the people are there and chanting. But of course, for our brand Transfermarkt and our sub-brand market values, to have also this kind of passion from the people, this is incredible, really. And I know it is hard, as you know. Maybe there's also in some areas some people think there's one big guy who do this market value, and he's either Fenerbahce fan or Galatasaray fan or Trabzon or whatever. We are all of them. We are Fener market, we are Galatasaray market, we are Besiktas market, we are all of them. But this isn't the case. So we have a lot of loops. We have a lot of people. Also the base, our market values are, the base are the people, the fans who are also writing in the forums. And to have this hype is incredible. And we know that we have this kind of privilege, also this pressure we feel, and we want to do and we want to make great values. And this is not something we take easy, of course, because, everyone is talking about, you are talking about, Marcus in Brazil is talking about, in Japan, Takaku is talking about, our colleagues now. And we feel it also in the company that we have this kind of pressure on us. But I think we have this kind of privilege that we know how Turkish people feel, but we also know how to do these values. And as I said before, we have a lot of loops. We have the base from the users, then our team, then our international team. Then we have a meeting, then we have a second meeting, then we review again, and then we enter in the, 10th loop, our values. So yeah, it's a crazy process. And of course, as you said, Stefan, you're also writing Miso or Manuel from our US team. So, now maybe again a lot of buzz. Which Fener market, Galatasaray market will be now? But yeah, as I said before, the people can chill. We know what privilege this is to do that. But yeah, it's always an exciting time, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I was really aware of until I joined Transfermarkt. And obviously, coming from Glasgow in Scotland, where we have Celtic and Rangers, I'm used to having passionate football fans interact with, I've worked for different media companies, and I certainly know how much heat you can get on social media when you write about Celtic or Rangers. But I feel
Yeah.
like the Turkish fans take it to a whole new level. And, I remember working one day and thinking, why is the website a little slow? And then one of my colleagues would be like, well, it's Turkish market value update day. There's so much traffic, so much interest that it certainly slows things down. And I'm sure this market value update was no exception. So I'll jump straight into the kind of talking points and maybe what has got fans quite excited or riled up. I think we have to start with Galatasaray, Lara. They're obviously the league leaders, the team that did particularly well in the Champions League, some very exciting results against Juventus. And the player I actually want to talk about with you right now is actually Yilmaz, the winger. Talk to me about why we've seen his market value rise, how well he's done at Galatasaray, and perhaps why he might be a potential star for the Turkish national team going forward as well.
So, Stefan, in our case, that the Turkish clubs, they need to have a good performance international. So, our league is maybe not the top 5 league, but we want to show ourselves in these big competitions like Champions League, of course. And of course, for the players, like you said, Baris Alper, he wants to show himself. He's now 25 years old. He know the league. He is also every season he has a lot of scorer, like goals, like assists, but he also have to show it in the Champions League, right? So this is something also for the player, what is important for him. And I think, and maybe you agree, maybe you have seen also the match against the Juventus. He was the match winner. He was not only in the first game the match winner, where in both of the games the Juventus player received a red card because of him. And also with his goal and his assist in the stoppage time. It was an incredible performance. As you know, we are all talking about Osimhen and what kind of player he is, and everyone knows it. But I have the feeling, maybe you can agree with me, that Baris Alper now has also a name. And this is not something big, not not something we are used to have a big Turkish name in a big Turkish club, right? And I think this stands for him. And also with this kind of performance, not only in the league where he always shows his talent and his kind of play, but also that he has shown it in this kind of level, the Champions League, the biggest stage in Europe, increased his value to that point. So I think this is now a small step, but maybe now against Liverpool, when he's also have a great performance, we will see. And for the Turkish national team, he is a key player for 2, 3, 4 years now. So yeah, he deserved that.
Yeah, that's a really important insight. I think that maybe some users and fans of Transfermarkt maybe don't understand about our market values, that particularly in the leagues outside the top 5, performances in the Champions League, Europa League, and for the national team can have a huge impact on players' market values. So he's certainly done that this season. As you said, he's earned that market value upgrade. Almost to the point, Lara, that he's perhaps outshadowed one of the men you've mentioned there, Victor Osimhen, who, of course, people who maybe don't pay a lot of attention to Turkish football, always a huge amount of interest in Osimhen outside of Turkey as well. Talk to us about how he's done so far this season for Galatasaray. He's also got a lot of goals and assists in the Champions League, scoring plenty of goals maybe in the Super League as well. But his market value didn't change in this market value update. And I'm sure you'll have lots of Galatasaray fans maybe wondering why, but also people outside of Turkey will take a lot of interest in his market value development, if you will, since he moved to Turkey.
So as you know, as you all know, maybe the market value is not only a performance value, right? So maybe I also had to say that to Baris Alper. Of course, he has also some interest in the top 5 leagues. And this is also the case in Osimhen. Everyone knows Osimhen. Osimhen is a brand. Osimhen is not only a player; he's a figure in football. So that is the reason why he has this high market value. As you know, or when you look at all of our Turkish market values, the Super League market values, there is no one near him. No one near him, his value. And this is huge because when some players are coming to Turkey, of course, the league is not as good as the top 5 leagues. And of course, we have to see, okay, fits that to the other values, but he's outstanding. He's not a player who plays in the Super League in normal cases. So this is something we have to take in account when we are doing his market value. When we considering his performance, then we also have, when we also focus on the Champions League, you see, okay, now he was also very important against Juventus. He scored that goal, I would say. But to be honest, after the first matches where he had an instant impact, where he also was the UCL top goal scorer at that time, he didn't make it wider again, or he didn't make it again. So we also have to keep in mind that kind of player have to do the impact, the match winner impact, like Baris Alper did in these two games. And Osimhen have to do that. And of course he did great, and of course that was okay, but he has to do more. Also, when we look at the Super League, 10 goals in 17 games, it's not bad, it's good. But when we look at the big games, he didn't show himself as Osimhen should. So when we look at the performance, also we have to keep in mind that he has a huge salary. This salary can't afford every club. And I think this was always the case why he didn't go to another club while he was at Napoli. And who can afford that? I think the only league that can afford that is the Premier League. And there were literally no rumors. And as you know, we are doing market values and not performance values. We have to keep an eye on that. And there were no really serious offers to him. We know that Juventus is interested in him, but he can't, or he will not go to the Serie A, because then Galatasaray has a special agreement with Napoli where when he's transferred to Juventus in such case, then Galatasaray has to pay a fine to Napoli. So Serie A is also out for the next 2 seasons. So his market is the Premier League, and maybe you know it better. We haven't heard any big offers or haven't heard any big interest in it, and this is also what the player is important. Where can I sell him? And when he has no market and his salary is huge and his fee is also huge, Galatasaray don't want to sell him under 100 million euros. So that's the reason why,
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And my follow-up question was along those lines, actually, because as you said, there's not been a huge amount of interest in clubs coming out to sign him. Obviously, as we approach the summer transfer window, that might change. The only notable one I've seen is maybe Bayern Munich as a potential replacement to Harry Kane at some point. Yeah. But, as you say, Osimhen's market value, I just checked there, it's actually more or less the same as it was when he joined Galatasaray. And do you think, how would you say his time in Turkey has impacted his appeal as a top player to the Premier League? Okay, maybe not Serie A, but maybe La Liga, Barcelona, Real Madrid, these clubs. Do you think his performances at Galatasaray have improved his chances of moving to one of these clubs, or do you think he has to do more between now and maybe the end of the season to not only increase his market value, but also increase his appeal on the transfer market?
So I think he has to prove himself, and also to have the big performance in the Champions League. And this is his stage. There he has to show, okay, I'm still here. I'm still one of the best strikers in the world. And this is something he has to show. Otherwise, in the league, of course, we know that Osimhen scores goals. Of course, he will score 10 goals from now. This is not something new. Otherwise, he wouldn't be at this stage of market value, right? Isn't it? He has to show himself in the Champions League. And when maybe Galatasaray also win against Liverpool, as they did in the group stage, maybe, and he had an impact, then of course the clubs will see, oh, okay, he's still the same Osimhen. He's still the same striker like he was in Napoli. And he's profiting from his name, but he has to show it on the highest stage, and this is Champions League, in my opinion. So there he has to show himself to be more appealed for the other clubs.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, and certainly something that I think a lot of football fans will be keeping an eye on between now and the end of the season. We can't talk about Turkish football, Lara, without obviously touching on Fenerbahce as well. We can't spend the whole time talking about Galatasaray, but there's a lot of changes at Fenerbahce as well. They're obviously not in the Champions League this season. They were in the Europa League, but why don't you talk us through some of the big talking points from their market value changes in this update?
Of course. So at first we have to keep in mind that Fenerbahce is in the last transfer periods always sold players with a high amount of money. So when it's now Yusuf Akçiçek the last time, or Arda Güler, or Ferdi Kadıoğlu. So this is also something we have to keep in mind when we're doing our market values. How good can clubs sell their players? And this is also the case in Fenerbahce. They proven themselves in that case. So that means that when young players, potential players, buy Fenerbahce, they are likely that we know from the past that Fenerbahce can sell them. So one example is Jadon Oosterwolde. He has now a market value to 18 million euros, and I think he will be the next big sale from Fenerbahce. And as the rumors were, the Premier League is interested. Also, Roma was uninterested in the winter transfer. So we know that this kind of player is very appealing for the clubs. And to highlight that again, we have to look at the profile. Jadon Oosterwolde is left-footed. He is tall. He is fast. He can play as a left back, but he began as a left back, but he is now playing as a center back. So this kind of profile in Europe is very, very interesting because you don't have many players who are left-footed, who are center back, can also play as left back, and are fast. And this kind of profile you have to keep an eye on, and also to adjust your market value to that. Also, we can highlight Sidiki Sherif, the 19 years old striker. This is something new in Fenerbahce. You know, Turkish league was always known for the big signing players, big star players like maybe Ederson or Asensio, maybe Skriniar. They are maybe a little bit too old for the other, but they are known for that. But now they have changed also their where they want to invest their money. And so one player is Sidiki Sherif. He's 19 years old. This is a potential signing, of course. The total package was 25 million euros. And when some player had this kind of fee, then of course we have to rise his market value according to that. We know that a lot of this is also potential for his potential and for his talent. This is the reason why we didn't go to 25 million euros, of course, to the total package, but 18 million euros is a good upgrade to have for him. So maybe to highlight Fenerbahce's market values, we know that they can sell players, and according to that, we have to adjust our market values, of course.
Yeah, two players I think who will undoubtedly be linked with the move to the Premier League. I've actually seen Oosterwolde was a player who was heavily linked to England before he obviously moved to Fenerbahce. And it's also worth bearing in mind, Lara, that Fenerbahce are only 4 points behind Galatasaray, and they're no longer in Europe. Galatasaray have, some would say, bigger fish to fry or bigger distractions. Do you think, we obviously still have a market value update before the end of the season, do you think if Fenerbahce can get themselves into a position where they're seriously challenging for the title, maybe even in first place, we might see some of these young players that you mentioned even see their market value rise even higher before the end of the season?
So, as you know, Fenerbahce there's a still, how to say it, for 10 years now, or maybe then 11 years, they weren't champion. Of course, this is the main focus. And for Galatasaray, the main focus is the Champions League. Of course, they want to be the Turkish champion, but now they also want to show themselves in the Champions League. So the focus differs from the clubs. But we also know that Galatasaray is always the best at the end of the season. So it will be, but we have to keep in mind that Galatasaray is struggling in this phase. So I think it will be a very, very interesting duel till the end, because I think at the end there will be small gap between both of them. And I think Fenerbahce can challenge Galatasaray seriously, because Galatasaray will focus now on the Champions League, and then will focus on the championship, the Super League again. So yes. But
Yeah,
Stefan, we have to keep in mind that we have now a derby at the weekend. Maybe then the points will differ.
Sure, of course. I mean, before we maybe wrap up, some really, obviously, as you've talked about, lots of really interesting changes. But one player I do maybe want to touch on is Hyeon-gyu Oh, who moved to Besiktas in January. He's already had an immediate impact there, but he's an interesting player, Lara, because he played briefly in Scotland, obviously in Belgium, and he has a profile which I think might make him very appealing as a potential sale for Besiktas down the line.
Yeah, of course. So the hype is big. So the hype is so big, South Korean broadcaster are showing Besiktas games. So this is the hype level we have. So yeah, he had an instant impact. He's also, in my opinion, a striker profile that everyone wants to have. So, and he showed it immediately with his goals. So he's a great striker for Besiktas, and also that they now have their form again is also that they have him now, to be honest. And I think we now have, Besiktas paid for him 14 million euros, but we put 1 million on top of that because his performance was outstanding in the first games for Besiktas. So his new market value will be 50 million euros. I think this is a good base to have. And when he continue like that, as you said before, this profile is very interesting for other top leagues. So I can imagine that when he scores more goals, more assists, then Besiktas can sell him again in the summer, because I think he's a great player, he's a great striker, and the top clubs will see that.
Yeah, for sure. I was just checking there. He's now had 3 moves in Europe in 3 seasons, or 3 years actually. So it wouldn't be surprising if he moved again next season. But yeah, a player whose profile I think would be very well suited to La Liga. Certainly the Bundesliga, which obviously has lots of Asian players, but perhaps even the Premier League. So perhaps one to keep an eye on, a name to remember, even if you don't have a huge amount of interest in Turkish football, because I suspect he'll be a big name in the summer transfer window. Well, Lara, that's all the time we have, but thank you so much for talking us through the Turkish Super League, the crazy mayhem, the chaos, and lots of interesting players as well, and performances. And I'm sure we'll have you back on the show very soon with the next market value update. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you for having me.